You only have one skin. Nourish it and wear it bravely.
Amid the COVID-19 pandemic, another pandemic has been sweeping across the country. There's been a significant increase in the cases of gender-based violence and crimes against women. We're joined by the founder of Father a Nation, Craig Wilkinson, who recently wrote in one of his blog posts, "The opposite of masculinity is not femininity, it's passivity. All it takes for evil to prevail is for good men to do nothing." We're also joined by award-winning writer, performer, producer, and activist Lebo Mashile to champion the no excuse message on gender-based violence and to discuss the actionable steps that need to be taken by men in particular in order to see any measurable change in this week's Ingram Skin Session. Welcome to the Loft, Lebo and Craig.
Thank you so much.
Now, let's just open up the conversation by asking, why is gender-based violence on a rise in our country, Craig?
Well, I think a lot of fault lines have been exposed during COVID. You know, anything that was existing and what the pressures that were, whether it be financial or anything else, or flaws in marriages have been exposed because of the pressure. People are feeling under the pressure financially. People are stuck in the same home together. So I think whatever was there, whatever pressures were, they just come out even more. It doesn't speak to the underlying causes that were there prior to COVID, but it does kind of highlight them.
Yeah, I love the way that you kind of set this up here for everyone to understand. And for yourself, Lebo?
I agree 100%. This is a time where people are under enormous pressure. I mean, it's a traumatic time for the planet. And in South Africa, it has exposed, exactly like Craig said, the fault lines, our weaknesses, our existing struggles. Gender-based violence has been a problem in South Africa for a very, very, very long time. And of course, now people are under enormous amounts of pressure. There's the health pressures that people are under. There's the financial pressure that people are under. You know, 3 million, they estimate between 2 and 3 million people have lost their jobs since the beginning of the year. That puts an enormous amount of pressure on relationships, on households. And when we are highly pressurized, highly stressed, and if we don't have tools to be able to self-examine and process that stress, we react in the ways that we have been conditioned to react. And in a society like South Africa, that's often in very violent ways.
Yeah. Gender-based violence in South Africa is just something that needs to be unpacked from a grassroots level. So where do you think that we as a society can start tackling it, Lebo?
The best place to start really is in school with children, teaching children about body autonomy, teaching children to respect their bodies, teaching children that other people do not have the right to touch their bodies without their permission, teaching this to very, very small children, and making it a constant conversation throughout our schooling. And then using the primary tools of communication that we have as a society, media, the arts, broadcasters, to spread the message equally to adults. This has to be a kind of intergenerational conversation and program. It has to be a project for all of us. And we have to inculcate the idea that if we're going to live here and if we are going to make this country work, then relearning and unlearning toxic patterns has to be a lifelong project for all of us.
Absolutely. Now, Craig, what are the actions men and women can take to empower themselves and actively fight the scourge of this gender-based violence?
It always starts with us, doesn't it? It starts with the individual. Then I think driving the change against gender-based violence must be driven by men. Men are the primary perpetrators. Let me rephrase that. The research shows that a lot of women hit their husbands as well as men hit their, but men are far more destructive. When it comes to murder, when it comes to rape, when it comes to sexual abuse, men are by far and large the biggest perpetrators. So it needs to be driven by men. And it starts with men looking at ourselves. We need to look at ourselves and examine, how do I pitch up to the world as a man? Do I pitch up as a mature, strong man with wisdom who's able to offer his strength to the world as opposed to take from the world? We're seeing, a young boy looks to his father and he looks to older men in communities to model what it means to be a man. And we as fathers and older men in communities and, the village that raises the child, the elders in the community need to examine ourselves and say, are we setting the right example? Are we modeling good masculinity? Yeah. Masculinity is there to serve, honor, love, protect, provide. That's what masculine strength is for. And are we using our strength to do that? So it starts with ourselves as men, examining ourselves, and fathers need to be restored. We need fathers in the community. The research coming out of Harvard recently that says it doesn't necessarily have to be a biological father in the home, but the number of good men modeling healthy masculinity in the community plays a massive role in terms of how boys grew up in that community. So we need to start with ourselves as men, examine ourselves, examine our concepts about masculinity, examine our perspective on women. Do we see women as equal co-creators of a beautiful world, or do we see them as less than? And once we get this right, we'll come a long way. And I think advice to women too is to say, don't accept false masculinity. Don't accept it. If there's any red flag that pitches up in a relationship, you're feeling demeaned or undermined in any way, don't accept it. Look out to allies and just say, this is not going to happen. So men need to say, not on my watch. This is not going to happen. And women need to say, I'm not going to tolerate this.
It seems like it takes two to tango when every situation is looked at and examined quite closely when it comes to gender-based violence. And remembering here that children are essentially sponges. Now, you both have worked extensively with gender-based violence and are aware of the effect that it has on society. What resources can you recommend to survivors, both men and women?
I think holding yourself accountable and taking responsibility for your own healing and your own unlearning, I think is absolutely essential. It's critical for every human being to be able to create the life that they want. We live in a particularly traumatized society. Intergenerational trauma is an heirloom in South Africa. I wish that we could enter a phase where personal development, self-development, the cultivation of skills like emotional intelligence, where such activities could become mainstream, because that's going to be better for everyone, for all of us to start to unpack the toxic patterns that we have been conditioned with, the toxic patterns that are ongoing in our lives. It's easy, I think, when you live in a society like this, to feel like you are almost in a tailspin, to feel like you are in a storm, like life is just happening to you because there's so much going on. But with tools like therapy, with books, with counseling, with community groups, support systems, even just really good friends who can and community members who can role model the kind of behavior that you aspire to. There's a lot of work that we are able to do on ourselves to help us change our lives. I love what Craig is saying about taking responsibility for yourself. And men also need to understand as well that these types of skills, the skills required to build relationships, to build communities, emotional intelligence, these are not just for women.
Yeah.
They might be described as soft skills, but they are by no means soft. These are skills that every human being needs to have, and in particular in our society, men.
Yeah, but now this is exactly what we're seeing. A lot of men do not seek those resources, and a lot of women fear seeking those resources, whether it's shelter or therapy. What do you feel about the topic?
We run a lot of programs for men, and one of the tragic realities of men is we grow up in a society that teaches us that real boys don't cry, real men don't cry, big boys don't cry. So men tend to carry stuff so much on their own, and we don't reach out to other brothers. And we started programs called Bands of Brothers, where we encourage and inspire and help men to say, let me be vulnerable. Because when I'm vulnerable with a brother and he's vulnerable to me, we stand together as brothers and we begin to have conversations around healthy, positive masculinity. Things change enormously. Lives literally are saved when men realize, I'm not alone. I don't have to bottle this up. I don't have to be Superman all the time. It's okay to be vulnerable. And let me gather around me a band of brothers that we can walk together to do this. No man is born an abuser. No boy is born an abuser. Something happens on the journey from boy to man. And as men, we need to gather together and really inspire and encourage and sharpen and stand together with each other and saying, this is not going to happen. True masculinity is not dominance. It's not aggression.
Before we get into those resources and, of course, that initiative that you've catapulted, what message of encouragement do you have for those who want to make a difference and realize the change?
We tragically live in a society where it's almost like there's a gender war, and we need to move to a gender dance. Masculinity, beautiful, powerful, wonderful gift to the world. Femininity, beautiful, powerful, wonderful gift to the world. Equal, but stunningly different. And as we co-create this world together, so I would say to men, you are important. You can make a difference. You need to make a difference. You're not designed to be passive. You're designed to stand up and speak up and use your strength for good to build a beautiful world. To women, I'd say, if you've ever suffered any sort of abuse, it's not your fault. It wasn't your fault. You don't deserve that. And what happened to you was not authentic and true masculinity. So you need to be able to say, this wasn't my fault. I'm going to step up and stand up and retake my power and be the incredible gift to humanity and society that you were designed to be.
I mean, Lebo, we see Craig here touching on what you spoke about, the fact that we cannot be victims to our circumstance and we can't come and go with the tide as the world is kind of allowing us and forcing us to. So what's your final word of encouragement?
Sure. I think that the tide is definitely turning. And as difficult as this moment of history that we are living through is, you know, with COVID and corruption and all of the issues that have been exposed in South Africa and in the world right now, I think this is also a moment of monumental change. There's an opportunity for each of us right now to reinvent ourselves, to go back to the drawing board, to look at what's not working, to reevaluate what it is that we can do. And I think that for people who are grappling particularly with gender-based violence, I think it's important for all of us to understand that there is even the perpetrator of gender-based violence, whether that is, you know, the abusive man, or whether it is the abusive woman, or whether it is the woman who enables abuse to happen, because we also live in a culture where, you know, when a woman tries to leave an abusive relationship, there are women in her own family or friends or community who tell her, go back, go back, go back. All of the begezela, msadi otwara tipa mo bohaleng, all those things that we get indoctrinated with. I think we need to have compassion for how we have been indoctrinated and to understand that no one oppresses unless they are broken.
Wow.
Inside of every oppressor is somebody who has been broken and oppressed, whose worldview and view of self has been distorted, and that is what allows them to demean, degrade, diminish the humanity of another human being.
Absolutely. Lastly, Craig, I have to touch base. A reminder about your pledge, No Excuse for Abuse, the Father a Nation initiative. That includes a free online course available on your website, and of course that informative booklet.
Absolutely, yeah. Free to anyone who logs in. The No Excuse online course consists of videos and reading material and exercise, a great resource for any man and also for any woman who wants to understand gender-based violence and take action against it.
Craig Wilkinson and Lebo Mashile, thank you so much for taking the time out to connect with South Africa and, of course, stepping out against the second pandemic, which is gender-based violence in our country. Goodbye.
Thank you
so much. Thank you.
Make sure to visit their website and make the pledge. No Excuse for Abuse, the Father a Nation initiative that includes free online courses and free booklets. Let's all educate ourselves on the various ways that we can collectively fight against gender-based violence.